So I'm just going to chat a little bit about how you should load the thread on the sewing machine. I know we have another little section that talks about the types of thread I use in garment making, and this is not it. This is about the different styles of bobbin you get and how they should go on your sewing machine. So this is a more conventional, what I would call kind of old-fashioned bobbin, and this one should go on the upright pin because this thread needs to turn to come off to be fed through your sewing machine, and you can see that my arms are not long enough. Now I work with a Bernina sewing machine. You can work with any brand of sewing machine. There are lots of great brands out there. You do not have to have the sewing machine that I've got. But what Bernina does make are what I call these little grey foam disky things, and these fit on lots of machines. And the difference between this type of spool being supported on here and not is huge. The foam just cushions and holds it nicely so it doesn't rattle, but the underside is a shiny plastic, and so when that is in place on the sewing machine, the plastic will spin really well. If you don't have that and you just have your little upright pin, it doesn't flow off in such a smooth manner, and it can really affect your tension. So for most sewing machines, this little foam disc will sit nice and flat underneath or onto the upright pin underneath your thread, and I think they are well worth getting. You will need to speak to a Bernina dealer to get a couple of those, and I would buy 2 or 3 because over time the actual foam does break down and become a little bit compressed. So that is what you do with that type of thread. Now the type of thread that is wound on a crosswise, in a crosswise fashion should go on the horizontal pin, because you can see as I take that thread off, the spool doesn't need to rotate, it just pulls off. So that type goes on the horizontal pin. I mean, this is a general rule. Some sewing machines only have an upright pin, some sewing machines only have a horizontal pin, but I'll chat a little bit more about that as we move on. Now you will have probably a range of 2 or 3 little plastic discs that you slide on to the end of the pin. I actually have 3 sizes, and the one that I choose to use most often is this tiny little plastic disc. It's not even a disc really, that just holds the thread on, and I choose that because it's nice and discreet, and it means the thread is coming off horizontally. If you put a big plastic disc on the end, it has to come up before it comes off, and it's just not quite as easy for the thread to run through the sewing machine. So choose the smallest disc that you have got, and I do also question whether you actually need to use a disc, because I always think, you know, it shouldn't really be coming off unless you are sewing like a demon or trying to sew through an earthquake or something. It should just come off without a disc on there. So you can play with that and see what you think of it. Now these 2, let me just move those out of the way. These 2 spools are quite big and quite heavy, particularly this one, and often they don't fit on a sewing machine. You know, how am I going to get that either horizontally or vertically? I'm not. And I use a lot of thread, and so I do tend to buy this style of big cone rather than smaller spoons, because it is advantageous price-wise. And so what I have here is a thread feeder. And this is a homemade one, but you can get them actually from quilt shops and all kinds of sewing shops. And I've already got a thread on there. I'm trying to save time here. Don't know why I'm doing that. Let me just unhook that. But the thread comes off, it goes up before it goes through the sewing machine, and that is a really useful piece of kit. And often when a thread is not feeding very well and you're having tension issues, this will help to solve it. Now we're going to move over to the sewing machine in a few minutes when I've chatted about a few more things, so I will actually show you this in action so you can see exactly how it is used. So that it should cover most of your thread queries on how do I load the spool on the sewing machine. I will say to you that sometimes you do get a thread that just doesn't feed very well and doesn't perform, and occasionally I will wind thread onto an additional bobbin and feed it from the top on a bobbin, because that's very light and it will just come off nice and easily. So occasionally I do that. I mean, that's just if you're having real issues and things are not working, which is not really something that you should really be coming up against. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say on thread at the moment, but I now want to look at stitch plates.